that is the message, that we are not separate from the earth. My experience in research didn't really show her as being a big part of that. She sort of was in the birth. That was it. The Greeks are awesome. They are so messy, and I love it. There are actually ways in which the environment regulates according to us, and that we regulate in response to the environment. The biggest thing and the best way to start is to get out into nature. You don't get the Mother of the Gods title and not be noticed a little bit. We need to just not give up. I have to remember that this isn't about the now. It's actually about the next.
Hello and welcome to the Pagan Portal Podcast, produced by Moon Books Publishing and presented by me, Rachel Patterson. I am incredibly pleased to welcome fellow Moon Books author and fellow wit, Irisanya Moon. Hello.
Hello, Rachel. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you. Different sides of the world. What
It
technology allows us to do. Different sides of the world, different time zones. It's all very clever.
Thank goodness, yes.
Oh yeah, it's opened up so much more to us, hasn't it? So if we can kick off, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, this is always the fun question to start with. So I'm Irisanya Moon. My pronouns are she and they. I live about an hour north of San Francisco in the U.S. And I am an author, as Rachel mentioned, and a witch and a priestess. I've taught internationally. I've had a chance to teach across Turtle Island in the UK, in Australia. But more fun things, I'm a Sagittarius sun, Gemini moon, Gemini rising, like long walks on the beach. And I think that the thing that I would say encapsulates me at this moment anyways, is that I really focused on this idea that life is a love spell, and the idea that we're constantly moving in and out of relationship with the earth, with ourselves, with other people. And I think that's really fascinating, and it informs my magic.
That's intriguing and wonderful way of looking at life. Fantastic. So you mentioned priestess, you mentioned witch. How would you actually describe your spiritual pathway, if you can put it into words? Because I know that's not always easy.
I can. So it starts as a young Irisanya who was brought up Catholic. And so I actually think that that's where this all began. I was really into Mary, really into ritual, and thought that I was going to become a nun. And so to a certain extent...
Now there's something to aim for.
Yeah, there's something. I was like, so, I mean, kind of, with different roles. So eventually over time, like I played church when I was a kid. I had my siblings like be like the altar folks. And because I was, of course, the priest, because that's the way I wanted that. And eventually I sort of moved into some relationships that brought me into New Age spirituality. I worked with a group of folks who are Native American, so I worked with that for a while. And then I found Wicca through the glory of the internet. And I was like, no, this feels like this is the direction I should be going. Eventually found a coven who started working with various books, and one of the books ended up being Spiral Dance. And that's how I found Reclaiming. and then I was like, are these people real? And then eventually I am now very in the Reclaiming witchcraft tradition. And also I practice fairy witchcraft too, FERI, and kind of eclectic, intuitive kind of witch.
Best way.
Absolutely.
You mentioned reclaiming tradition.
Yes.
Can you, just for those that aren't familiar with that term, can you just give us a bit of insight?
Can I unpack that? Yes.
Yeah. Go.
I have a book. I have 2 books on reclaiming, but also reclaiming witchcraft was started-ish in the 70s, and it was something that came out of this sort of convergence of environmental activism and the sort of human potential movement, and also fairy witchcraft magic and various other activisms, and probably something else that I'm forgetting, feminism. goddess spirituality, a whole bunch of things were happening and was boiling up, not just in the San Francisco Bay Area, but also there. And there was Starhawk, who was writing about that and doing a lot of activist work. A lot of other people too. This is not just Starhawk. But a lot of folks were sort of getting together and realizing that, maybe there's a way to bring in spirituality into the politics and the activism. So they basically started to have some classes on, how can we build our own rituals? How can we do this? And to make a very long story and complicated story short, these classes ended up growing into bigger and bigger groups of witches and bigger groups of magical practitioners, all informed by the idea that, we are part of the earth. We're in relationship with the earth, can do things, and our magic can fuel that. And eventually Reclaiming used to be sort of in the Bay Area, and then it just got too big and too focused, and folks wanted it in other areas. So Reclaiming came up with this idea of the principles of unity, which is sort of a mission statement that encapsulates what Reclaiming witches think mostly and practice mostly. And it's changed a few times because we're an evolving tradition. We're very young. And so basically, and then Reclaiming sort of spread out into the world. So I think what we usually say is that it is a eco-feminist tradition that seeks to unify spirit and politics. And so very activist focused, but also not everybody is that activist stereotype. So, but we're an evolving tradition. We're also anti-racist and anti-transphobia, et cetera, et cetera. So
all the important stuff.
Absolutely. Evolving. I mean, it's an evolving conversation, right? And we weren't necessarily always saying that.
I think witchcraft and spirituality has to evolve, though, doesn't it? I think it has to be fluid because times change, don't they? Every day it feels like sometimes.
Well, and a lot of folks, I would say throughout Reclaiming's history, is I haven't been in it for that long, a lot of folks were feeling themselves not being represented or supported in the ways that they could be. And I think that because it's been mostly an ongoing dialogue, it has been wondrous to see how it's shifted and changed. And I'm really curious to see what's going to happen in the future too.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Who knows?
Who knows, right?
Now, you mentioned one of your books, Reclaiming Witchcraft. You've, by my last count, I think I counted 7 books published with Moon Books. Does that sound about right?
I checked, yeah. No, it was. I don't remember either. So, yes.
So what inspires you to actually choose the subjects that you write about?
Well, and to be fair, some of them I get asked to write about. But what I would say, I agree to write about them for a few reasons. One, I usually write about deities that I have worked with, at least in some capacity, at least I try to, or deities I want to work with. So I think that's one of them. I like to bring forward what I think I know about deities and building relationships with them. I also like to I wrote about Reclaiming a couple of times because, first of all, I was asked, but 2, there is so much incorrect information out there because it's written from the outside. And, that makes sense. And to a certain extent, there have been a lot of stereotypes of Reclaiming, and some are true, but also a lot of them aren't. And it's evolving. So a lot of folks had this concept of it being something that it never really was. And a lot of folks were focused on the feminist and thought it was very Dianic, which maybe for a hot minute, but not ongoing. So anyways, though I like to write about things that A, I either know about, 2, I'm very passionate about. Also, I typically will pick topics based on, or deities based on things I'm seeing in the world. For example, the Norns, I love the Norns, first of all, but also I felt like their energy and their stories could really speak to hope. And that felt like something maybe we could use a little bit of in this world.
Oh, I dropped the maybe. Definitely.
We don't need to couch that. Yes. No, we need hope. Lots of hope. Yes. So I think that those are the main reasons. And sometimes those themes have emerged as I've been writing it, so I haven't always gone in with that. But I think that I try to think things that are relevant, things that are exciting, and things that I feel can inspire folks to find their own magic. Because I'm not one to tell you how to do it. I might tell you why. And then you can figure out what that looks like.
That's the best way to do it, though, isn't it?
I don't like to be told what to do. So.
Oh, no. I think particularly as well with the deity books, because I know a number of yours books are on specific deities. You learn as you write about them too, don't you? There are things that come up and you think, that makes sense.
Yes, there are definitely some things I uncovered along the way about Iris, about the Norns. Some of my books that are coming after Gaia also learned some things that I didn't know until I started reading more.
I think that it directs you, doesn't it, on your own pathway as well?
Oh, absolutely. I have been definitely changed and informed and shifted because of what I've learned and what I've had to unlearn too.
Yes, that's a big part of it too, isn't it?
Truthfully, it is. Sometimes it makes sense. I never wanted to work with Aphrodite, for example, thought she was a flake and had to unlearn that. And thankfully so.
So you mentioned Gaia then. Now that's your latest book and it's part of the Moon Books Earth Spirit series. How did she call you to write about her?
So I actually got asked if I wanted to write about Gaia, to be fair. And because I feel like I'm sort of trending in the Greek mythology brand. So
it's a bit of a theme.
Bit of a thing. But
it's also, a good theme.
It's a good thing. And also I feel that, Gaia is really intertwined with my reclaiming witchcraft too. And so I feel like it was a pretty natural thing to do. Yeah. She was also one of the first gods I think I met during my magical journey. And thankfully, a lot of my books will talk about those sort of meeting points. And she was one of the first ones in a meditation I did really early on. I don't think I knew what I was doing, but I really remember her sort of sitting and coming to me in a vision and having like that stereotypical earth like belly.
Like all the statues that you see.
Right, exactly. Like all the yeah. Absolutely. So, but she was also so welcoming, and it was the first maybe experience that I've had with a deity that was, oh, you're not above me, I'm sitting next to you. And I think that was a welcoming that was really essential for everything that happened next.
I think it's one of those things that people automatically use the word worship when deity is brought in. But it sounds like you and I are the same with this. It's walking beside them, it's working with them, isn't it? Not worship's the wrong word for me.
Yes, I think I said on maybe several times on different podcasts or interviews that I am in communion and not supplication. I think that when there's a hierarchy there, I start feeling like it's Christianity again. And has its value for folks, but I want to be empowered in my practice, not sort of judged and sort of you have to do it a certain way. That it's a collaborative effort.
I agree with all of that.
Great. I knew I liked you.
We're on the same page. We're okay.
Too, yes. Phew, we can keep going then. Oh, goodness. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's just a thing. Like, why? I feel like I'm divine. And so why not? And I'm very clear that the gods have a wider perspective than I do. And also, I'm still have my own divinity that is just as important.
That's a good way of thinking of it. Yep. So the actual Gaia book does it bring a specific message to people?
I think Gaia is actually a very interesting point in my writing journey because I keep talking in each book more and more about building relationships with gods.
Right.
And this was the book that I was actually asked to, could you write a book on Gaia that talks about how to build a relationship with her so that in saving her, you might save yourself too. And I think that that is the message, that we are not separate from the earth. It's been something that society has done to sort of isolate us and say, well, that's going on over there. But it's actually, I'm earth too. I'm made of the things that are the things I want to save. And so in this book, if I can remember that relationship and cultivate that relationship, I think that it offers more stability and more sort of motivation, I guess, for acting on the earth's behalf, because I'm acting on my behalf. And sometimes, acting on the behalf of a friend is so much easier than my own. And so there's also that. If Gaia is someone who I care deeply about, in saving her, I'm saving me.
Relationship, I think, is the key word for me there. I think that works with all deities, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It's about building that relationship. Same as any other relationship, whether it is friendship, marriage, partner, whatever it might be.
Absolutely. It's the reciprocation. It's not just, I say that the gods aren't gumball machines. We don't just put in so much worship and we get out something, It's not like that, or at least I don't think it is. So hasn't worked for me. So I think that it's a reciprocation. And I think that the more you build that with the divine, the more you do it in your regular life and vice versa.
I think whenever anyone hears the name Gaia, it is Earth Mother. You kind of associate, you're giggling. Why are you giggling?
It's true.
I think it does. People think immediately Earth Mother. It kind of goes hand in hand, doesn't it?
It does.
Your book, you actually give different titles for her and different epithets. Why all of these different ones? What are they? How can we use them?
Yeah, and I actually didn't include all of them. So I included some. There's many, many more. The Greeks love to have different titles. And one of the things that I think is great about these is because epithets are like their titles, they can sometimes describe the cult that is worshiping Gaia at that point or another deity. They can also relate to geographic locations, etc., or, like I said, qualities. So epithets allow you, anybody to sort of focus in on a certain energy of Gaia that we might want to work with, or maybe a Gaia of a certain area. I think that those are all very helpful for sort of targeting things that are more important to you. So a couple of the epithets, we're just going to put a little note in here right now. Ancient Greek has many different pronunciations. It is not one pronunciation. So I am not, Duolingo is very mad at me for not keeping up with my stuff. But here's one of them that I will say, Olympia, because I decided to go easy. So that is the Gaia of Olympus, like one of the gods up on high, right? So maybe if you're wanting to work with Gaia as sort of this more omniscient, this more like regal sort of being, you might use that epithet like in chanting, in song, in carving on a candle, in singing to the earth. Epithets are just a really great way to hone in on certain energies, or to learn some epithets, chant them a whole bunch of times, and then you learn something as you do it. Like, oh, this is the energy of this particular epithet or title, or this cult.
Different facets.
Absolutely.
Oh.
I mean, Aphrodite has 1 billion of them, and that's, I think that's not an understatement. But, and there's like Gaia, there's broad-chested goddess, there's the giver of gifts, things like that. And I think looking those up and finding one that resonates for you also is like a nickname. Like when you have friends, you have nicknames. Why is a deity relationship so much different? Or different than a human relationship? That I question often.
I question lots of things of.
That's a whole other podcast. Yes.
So where did Gaia actually fit in with the worship of the ancient Greeks? Was she top of the pile or somewhere else?
So shockingly, not really. Not really. You would think for the creator of all many beings, not all beings, but for many beings, she really wasn't in there a lot. Like for a moment she was. And then she sort of got, I think this makes a lot of sense. It feels like she sort of got pushed aside in favor of Demeter, however you want to say it.
Right.
Because it makes sense. Goddess of like the harvest and everything is a wee bit more important to the everyday person. And so Gaia, while around, and there were cults, and there are still folks that practice with her as the focus, my experience and research didn't really show her as being a big part of that. She sort of was in the birth. That was it. But, maybe I didn't find some of them, but I think that she doesn't strike me as somebody who was really big, although she was such an important part of everything. And that is really common, I'm finding, in Greek mythology. Hestia is the same way. Hestia is like in all of the daily sort of things of Greek culture a lot of the times, but has nothing written about, like barely anything written about her.
I'm going to show off now because I've just come back from Athens.
Oh.
We spent a week in Athens. And I'm just thinking of all of the and there are lots of statues. There wasn't any. Well, I didn't see any of Gaia or Hestia, actually.
Nope.
Aphrodite, lots of Aphrodite.
Of course. She's everywhere. I don't think she would stand for anything else.
Not one of Gaia at all in any of the ancient sites that we visited. And I hadn't thought about that until just sitting here now listening to you say that.
Well, and I think it's one of those things, or at least this is my hypothesis, that if the deity is a part of everything, like you're worshiping in every moment. Like there's not a way, like you don't have to separate it because it's everywhere. Like Gaia is all of this. Hestia is every flame, is every heart.
Yes.
So I'm finding this, like how all these little pieces fit together, just a really fascinating.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, there were lots of Aphrodite. You could tell her statues. They were quite pert.
That sounds right. That sounds right.
Yes.
I haven't been yet, so I will.
Without looking at the plaques, you could tell her.
She likes the attention.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that actually until you said it. And for someone that we think of now as such an important deity as Gaia, yeah, but it actually makes sense. As you say, if she is part of everything.
I think a lot of things to think about with deity is context, right? Like it's not just about like their stories, but it's the context in which they first arose and where they were sort of maintained and written about. Because I think a lot of times we situate gods in the modern world and we're like, well, we would do it like this.
And we've kind of gone ahead of ourselves because Gaia she was the creation story.
Yes, she birthed many beings and then birthed many beings with some of her sons. And
we love a good old Greek myth. Yeah,
the Greeks are awesome. They are so messy and I love it. I think they're messy, but she birthed like Uranus, like the sky, and she birthed the Titans and birthed the sea, and then laid with Uranus and birthed more folks, and with the sea and more folks, and birthed monsters and birthed
not just human beings, then monsters as well. She's quite multi-talented.
She's multi-talented, very busy, and also like so many Greeks too, it's so easy to say Mother Earth is such an amazing being and just so like perfect and without flaw. And same thing with Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Gaia got ticked off that Uranus didn't like one of their sons because he turned out to be a beast, and then tried to get Uranus castrated and succeeded. So she's a complicated being and not just like, I birthed all the things, but now I'm going to hurt them.
So is there a way, I mean, the Greek stories they are fascinating, aren't they? They are so far removed
They're
from
busy.
what we kind of see now, is there a way of learning from those stories and reflecting them to modern times?
I think for me, the best things that we can learn from, I think, any stories. But let's talk about the Greeks is specifically. Your choices have an impact. That's a big one in Greek. I think we can also learn to pause before reacting.
That's been one of my particular difficult ones to learn. Yep.
Same. And also, I think a lot of Greek stories seem, at least the way they're written down, make sure you have the whole story before you act.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of miscommunication, but the way I learn from stories the most is to read them and situate myself in them and sort of see like what was going on from the viewpoint of this being in the story. What was going on from the perspective of, hey, like if we're talking about Persephone, Demeter, and Hades, what was Hades thinking? What was Persephone thinking? What was Demeter thinking? And when we can sort of step through different perspectives, I think it really helps us to not only understand them, but understand ourselves and the way that we might show up or not. So I think story is the beginning of the relationship too. It's the gossip that we hear about the gods until we get to know them better.
But I think in any situation, there is always two sides to a story. Sometimes three,
More.
Sometimes four. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
So that makes absolute sense. And as you said earlier, there's so much misconception out there. It is so easy to get dragged in.
It's easy to get dragged in. And also, one thing to remember with a lot of Greek mythology is that it's translated mostly by white academic men. And so that gives its own lens. We can just say that. It will give a lens, and it's something I talk about ad nauseum in my books. There are some more female translations coming out. And so the Iliad and the Odyssey have now been translated by Emily Wilson. Sorry. Apologize if it's one of those. So she's done those, which are great. And I think that the more we have of that, the more the stories are actually going to unfold in different ways.
Yeah, it makes a difference. The translations, they do. Some does get lost in translation, doesn't it?
Or misplaced.
Yeah.
Like,
Gaia plays a huge part in nature, obviously, and in the planet Earth. Are there specific areas that she's more associated with? So could we go to a rocky place to connect with her, or trees, or does it not matter?
Personally, I say it doesn't matter. And I would also say that she's often sort of called she's called the goddess of elemental earth. So like soil and rocks and stones and caverns. So you will often find stories of her being, of beings being hidden in like the caverns of Gaia, or being punished in the caverns of Gaia, as it were. But sort of, like Zeus was hidden away. So there's almost this idea that her elemental pieces or attributes are sort of what can move stories along, or that have help folks to understand, I don't know, the movement of, I'm trying to say this is going to be a part we're going to edit because my brain just went like in 15 different directions. Stories of folks being hidden or like protected in the chasms of Gaia, some for protection, some for punishment. But I would say that part of this is not to say that she's in one place, because she's not. She's in all the different places. But one of the things that's important about this cavern chasm thing that I came up with as I was thinking about this podcast. Caverns, chasms are made out of rocks, right? And rocks started as organic matter and at their core, but then they are formed and changed and shifted by pressure and time. Aren't we all?
Oh, yes. Sometimes wittingly, sometimes not.
Right. And so I think that, the whole question of like, is she connected with one thing? Yes. And I think that she's pretty much everywhere. She's in all of the beings, and the green and the rock and the stone. And I think that that's one of the reasons why she can be sometimes intimidating and sometimes hard to see, because if she's in everything.
There's no specific one place. Yeah.
We humans like to focus. We like to focus and sort of say, oh, you're there.
Now, you also mention in your book, and you give a fantastic exercise to link her to the cycles. How does that, can you explain a bit how we do it, what we gain from it?
I think this is actually a practice that I was assigned at one point to do, because I mentioned I'm a Sagittarius. I don't like to sit and ground a lot. So one of the practices I was given was to sit in a place, and this is a very common practice that's given to folks. It's called having like a sit spot. And where you sit in one place and you sort of observe what's happening around you. In the book, I talk about, what's the weather like? What's the humidity like? And sort of those easily quantifiable things. But finding a way to sort of look out into a space of nature as you know it, and to see how it changes over the year. I think it's so easy to forget that things change. And so this practice allows me, and maybe others, to understand that change happens all the time. And I'm a part of that, and I am in relationship with that. So I've seen people like knit these amazing blankets that have like different colors for different temperatures, and like throughout the year. And so it's this amazing like stretch of history. So doing things like that and sort of allowing yourself to visualize, experience, and be in contact with the way things change. But that comes from paying attention. That comes, right? That's there's the trick.
Because that's a thing to learn, isn't it? Not everyone is very good at that.
I know. But when I did do the sit spot for a while, and it was only for like a few minutes a day in my backyard in the same place, I did see everything change. And I also saw the way that animals related to me was different, because I was becoming a part of that. And that's also a part of this practice, is not just like me looking out, but also seeing like how things might engage with me. Like humidity is at this, I am not in the best of moods. When things shift in, the moon phase, things are different, right? We are like, I think we all know this intuitively, but to really like practice it, and it's so common to journal about our internal landscape. So what about journaling about our external landscape, and sort of seeing how those two meet?
Connection to nature, connection to energy.
Relationship.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Relationships again.
Always back to that.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, there is one thing that in your book, one of your chapters, and it is called the Gaia hypothesis.
Yep.
Big word. Big word for your early morning and my late afternoon.
Sure.
I'm going to ask you to outline what the Gaia hypothesis is.
Yes, I am ready for you. So the Gaia hypothesis was formed in the 70s again. So think about Reclaiming was around then too. So the Gaia hypothesis was coming out, and it was developed by James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis, who was a microbiologist, I think. So basically in their own scientific studies and their own scientific observations, they were beginning to notice that maybe there was not really a separation between like the idea of us and the environment. There wasn't a separation, that we were the environment. So basically my whole hypothesis for this book is that we are not separate, right? We are a part. And this was at the scientific level, seeing that be something that they could describe and sort of quantify, that so much similarity. And that because there is this relationship, because there isn't this vast separation, that there are actually ways in which the environment regulates according to us, and that we regulate in response to the environment. But because that's true, because we regulate ourselves in response to the environment, and the environment regulates in response to us. And so it's a relationship that impacts each other. And so this hypothesis says that maybe we should be a little bit more considerate of how that is going and how we can, support each other because we are having an impact. And I think that this sounds really wonderful and perfect for witchcraft and elemental magic and things like that. Lovelock was not a perfect being. I just want to say that for the record. He also was really in support of nuclear power.
Okay.
and thought that was actually a really great way to regulate with the environment, like that it was an okay source of power.
We learn,
right? We don't have to agree with everybody, right? And but another thing that I found really fascinating, and I found this, it's in the book, this idea that so AI is a big thing right now, right?
Yeah.
And will continue to be. He actually talks about AI being something that might be really good. He talks about that actually being something that might be helpful, because if AI understands that if the earth is damaged, it won't exist anymore.
Okay.
Then it might work to its own self-survival.
Yes.
So when I saw that,
onto that side of it.
right? I mean, but if everything regulates itself, it doesn't want to be destroyed. So it might start coming up with ideas. It might start acting on its own behalf.
I do love when science and magic meet and understand each other. It's sad that it took till the 1970s for them to realize it, but I love it when it comes together.
Absolutely. And I think it's endlessly fascinating, and it's unpredictable. Who knows what's going to happen next? I don't know. Thank goodness. So not in charge.
So do you bring your practice of reclaiming witchcraft in with your work with Gaia? How does it meld together?
Bringing Gaia into reclaiming is probably the way, or maybe it is. Well, it's a reciprocal relationship. So one of the things that's in the principles of unity that unifies the idea of reclaiming and what we believe is if there's a line that says, our tradition honors the wild. And that's where honoring the wild came from. But our tradition honors the wild. And it also, the principles of unity, which I don't have memorized, folks, does also talk about the cycles of life. Thank goodness, right? You would think that I've talked about reclaiming enough that I think people might assume that I know it. I do not. But it talks about the cycles of life too. So Gaia is a really natural part of all of it. And I would say that it's not that she's necessarily named, but there. Like she could be seen as an undercurrent of conversation and relationship building. How do we save our planet to save ourselves? Like that is activism, right? And that is or environmental activism. It is that conversation of how do we do that? How do we do that together? How do we do that in a group? How do we do that with our magic? So reclaiming does a lot of work around that. Like how do we focus our intention, focus our magic to help the earth, but also to help, other activism, directions too. But I would say that at its core, it is about the earth. Like our core class is the elements of magic. And it is not just about the elements and building a relationship with them. It's also about building ritual, building community, building that foundation. And I think that Gaia is definitely like in the cracks and crevices of that without necessarily being named. But I think that at the beginning of reclaiming, definitely she was probably like a big part of that, because it was very much like goddess focused spirituality. And I could see that, that image too of the big breasted earth in the lap sort of goddess.
I think we like to name that energy too, don't we?
Often.
It doesn't actually need it, does it? But we like to put labels on things, don't we?
Gosh, we do. Can we put everything into a little box, a little container where we can understand it? Right?
Yeah. We do. That's what we do.
It's true.
So if people wanted to connect with Gaia and her energy, buy your book, obviously.
That's the first step.
That's the first step. Then where do they start?
After that. So I think the biggest thing, the biggest thing and the best way to start is to get out into nature. I recognize that's not readily available for everyone. So I think that there are other ways to do that. But I think recognizing and getting into natural spaces is important. I could tell you that reading books and like chanting the certain thing is the way to do it. But really with Gaia, it's getting out, it's noticing the cycles of things. It is maybe getting to know like the local plants in your area, getting to know the rhythms of the seasons in your area. Like I live in California, way different than other folks, way different from where I grew up. So it's an ongoing conversation, but starting with how do I get to know Gaia as what, who, how she is? And that's through experience, I think. And sitting in nature, her, to see what resonates and what comes up for you.
We're back to relationships again, aren't we?
I will always bring it back. Yep. I will. Mm-hmm.
No, that makes perfect sense.
It does. I mean, it's an ongoing thing because how do you build a relationship with anyone? You get to know them. You go to the places that are interesting to them. You listen to their stories. You ask them questions. You spend time with them. You make time for them. And you talk about things when they don't go well.
When I think of Aphrodite, as I know she's one of yours.
Yep.
I think of love. So
Yes.
if I was working love magic, she would probably be my first call. What about Gaia? Are there specific areas of magic that she is associated it with or that you would call on her to help with?
I mean, I think that environmental activism is the first thing. And I think that I don't actually say that specifically in the book because it's everywhere. I talk about activism a lot. But I think a couple of things that she's been associated with are there is some thought that she was the original deity behind the oracle at Delphi.
Okay, interesting.
So there's original thought that is true. And so oracular work.
Right.
I think that would be an amazing magic to work with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sort of goodness knows we need all the help we can get. How do we help you? Please tell me. But I think that one of the things that strikes me again and again about any activist movement or conversation is that often at its core and sometimes at its inception is this idea of grief, like grieving something that is being lost, grieving something that is changing. And how do we meet that grief so that we're not stuck in it? And I think if you want to work with anybody, Gaia is a great one for that. She has been through it. She has been through the stuff. She has been through so many like relationships that didn't quite pan out, grief over, various things that are done. And so I actually would work with her with grief because she is so massive in her energy and experience that grief becomes a smaller thing in her lap.
There can't be much that she hasn't seen
Right.
or been through or done or experienced.
Exactly. And I think that is closely linked to, not only doing magic, like grief practices or grief witnessing and things like that. Joanna Macy is a big proponent of this. Also check her out if you're into that conversation. And I talk about that a lot. But also death work, also this cycle of life, this idea that things do change, things do die. Gaia can hold that too, does hold that, will continue to hold that, has seen it in its various forms, functions, and outcomes. And death serves a purpose too. And so sitting with her in those moments, I think is another strong way to connect.
Do you think rituals, and by rituals, I mean anything from lighting a candle right through to the whole shebang, and altars and offerings and all the modern sort of things we do in witchcraft.
Yes, the fancy.
Are they important to connect with Gaia?
I personally think ritual is important in general, full stop. Not just connecting with a deity. I think that ritual is not only a way to connect, but it's also a way to, I think, create importance and to, create something that is more valuable. So I think of stepping into ritual as a time of, making sacred and making something sacred, saying that something is sacred enough that I want to devote my time, attention, and energy to this. And that to me is what ritual is. It is setting aside a moment to be in communion again. Do I think that she needs the big fancy rituals that maybe you and I are thinking of? I think that does have its merit, because I think that people do pay attention to that. I do think so. And I also think that creating small natural altars out in nature to say thank you, or to say, hey, I see you, or this is a wish for such and such to happen for you, I think is just as wonderful. And I also think that something that comes along with ritual for me is that the more I do ritual, the more I'm creating a history with something. Like each time I'm doing something, I am creating a story of a connection, of something building. And so I think that's important too, because it's allows for ongoing communication and also retrospection of how that worked and how it worked better.
I'm going to throw 2 names at you now. In your book, you reference Rhea and Demeter.
I've heard it both ways. So.
Yeah. How are they connected to Gaia?
Yeah, so I talk about these folks because Gaia doesn't, like at some point, she just sort of like disappears. Like she doesn't really get talked about a lot. But then Rhea does, and so does Demeter, gets a lot of action, right? And so Rhea, both ways I've heard, was one of Gaia's children. And so she actually gets to, in a lot of texts, she actually gets the title of Mother of the Gods.
Okay.
Which
rude
seems, there's that. No wonder why Gaia is so ticked off. I think that, interesting, but she sort of gets that. It's not super clear why, but it is, she does get that title, and then slowly Gaia is just sort of not there. Right. But also, if you look at Rhea, she doesn't really have like a cult following. She doesn't really have a practice of worship. It's an interesting little mystery that I wanted to add to the book, because I was like, if you see this name, you should know who this is and what she's done. No, I think that there's definitely an interesting blip in the story.
Yes. But I said, I think most people are familiar with the name Gaia, and even probably Demeter. But Rhea, not so much. Not so much.
But also she is in books. Like I see her in stories. Her name shows up. But also I think that if you're doing any reading and sort of any discovering, and you hear about the Mother of the Gods, you might get 2 different answers.
Right.
And so it's good to know that. It's good to know that that's in the field. And Demeter just kind of jumped in and was like, more important, right? And often Gaia and Demeter were worshipped together. So that, and then slowly like Gaia was like cut out of the picture. But they, there were some texts that kind of conflated the two, that Gaia and Demeter were kind of the same being. And that could just be a translation thing. But I don't typically conflate deities. I don't. I feel like they have their own separate stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Different personalities, different characteristics. Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's plenty of energies and sort of assignments for the gods to go around. We don't need to share a lot of them. There's plenty to do. And yeah, so I reference those 2 just because so often they all come up together. And so they are all different, and they all have different things to do. And they all held like some importance in Greek society. Rhea a little bit less, but also you don't get the Mother of the Gods title and not be noticed a little bit.
That's quite a grand title, isn't it?
Right.
It's something to live up to, really, isn't it?
The Greeks are messy. They're so messy, and I love it. Like a little soap opera, but it makes them so, like I don't feel like I'm separate from them. Like I've been jealous. I've done not some of those things, but I've definitely like made some mistakes, and I'm not a faultless person. And so when I see that in the divine,
relatable because they have human idiosyncrasies and they get stuff wrong.
Absolutely. And they've done way worse things than I will ever do. So there's also that.
We could never achieve that. We'd never want to achieve that, let's be honest.
No, we're not at that point. No.
So kind of going forward in, this question I'm going to ask you now probably has a whole week's worth of answer to it. What can we do as human beings to help the planet going forward?
Yeah, I think that I could give a whole bunch of to-dos. I could give a whole bunch of links to places that are already doing this work and how you could help, and I do in the book. But one of the things that I think is the starting point in all of this is to shift our mindsets. Like, that's the point of this book, is to shift our mindsets from that's out there and I'm here. So in order to shift that mindset, I firmly believe that we need to just not give up. Like, that sounds like really, to cultivate ongoing hope in the face of despair, in the face of grief. How do I cultivate hope for this beautiful earth to continue on long after me? I think that we can do this not by, first of all, confronting that there is grief and confronting that there are moments where we feel like anything I do is not enough. And I think that that's the first step in switching a mindset, is just what is not okay and just admit it's not okay. And then I think that the thing, once we can, I don't think we're going to heal that, but I think that confronting that is important. Finding a community of like-minded folks that also are wanting to do things is the next sort of step. Because I could tell you what to do and that's fine, but if you don't have a group that also helps sustain itself, it's not sustainable. It's just I went out on a Saturday and cleaned a beach, which is great and wonderful. It is not to say that it's not. But shifting your mindset, finding a group of like-minded folks, and then taking action, because this is an action moment. And again, a lot of ideas about that in the book. I try to bring in things that other folks haven't already said. But one of the things that I think is really important to say too is that taking action doesn't have to be the biggest thing ever. It does not have to be perfect. There needs to be some sort of action. How am I? So if we're talking about a relationship with Gaia, is this choice that I'm making something that's helping her? Is this additional piece of plastic? Is this thing that I'm buying that I don't really need? Is this extra energy that I'm using that I probably don't really need to use? Et cetera. It's more about the mindset of like, how am I impacting this relationship? And where can I make little changes? And I already hear people saying that, yes, but it's the bigger corporations that are doing all of the damage and what I do doesn't really matter. That is all true. But also, it is true. To be clear, it is. But also, that sort of thinking that I don't matter, if there's a whole bunch of people thinking that, it does actually add up to mattering. And one of the things I do talk in the book about, again, with the mindset thing, is that this idea of being perfect in our ecological everything is a tool of white supremacy. It's a way of like saying like this person, I don't matter. Like, so if I'm not perfect in all the things, I just won't do anything, and then nothing changes. So there's that. It has to start somewhere, and I think that is often where we get stuck, is that we wait for the perfect thing. The other thing that I want to say that feels important in this sort of like, what do I do next, is that we live in a culture that wants things instantaneously. We want to see change right now, or yesterday for that matter. We want everything to happen right now. The work of environmental activism is not an instantaneous work. It is a marathon. It is not a sprint. What we do today, I know and hope that it will impact folks down the line. I won't see the impact of that. So it's the mindset thing again. It's the, I have to remember that this isn't about the now. It's actually about the next. And to not do things or make choices based on what happens in this moment.
We do. You're right. It is, isn't it? Everything. People want everything right now. Sure. They don't want to work for it. They don't want to take the time. They don't want to put the effort in. They don't. I'm generalizing, obviously.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is. The culture is very much like that, isn't it? Yeah, it is. You're right. It's you changing the mindset. It's a little bit of time, as long as you get there.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a little, like, it's not an overnight thing for your mindset to change either. No. It is a gradual thing. That's why I talk about, like, finding like-minded people so that you can continue to have folks talking about these things and hyping each other up, and making sure that we're staying hopeful in the face of things that seem kind of hopeless a lot of the time. It's super easy, I think, also in the media to see all the things that are going wrong. You can, if you look hard enough, you can find the things that are going right.
The media only like to report about the bad stuff. They don't like reporting about the good stuff.
No. But I will say this, like, this sounds like a joke, but it's not. I've learned a lot from different folks who have TikTok accounts who are showing the good stuff that's happening. Like, yes, this is burning, and also this is going well. And these are ways that we're learning to clean up the ocean. These are ways that we're learning to save this animal. There are some animals that aren't endangered anymore. Like, things like that. And not to create, like, sort of, oh, I don't have to do as much. No. But it is to say that actions do have consequences, and in a good way.
It's out there. It is out there.
It is. You will find, what is it? Mr. Rogers says you will find the helpers, right? And I think that's true. I think that the folks are out there doing the things and being smarter than I am. So
it's a community thing, isn't it? It's all pulling together. So I'm going to finish on a completely irrelevant question.
Love it.
To that.
I'm ready.
What was the last book that you read that you enjoyed? Not for research, but for entertainment. Or it can be for research if that's what you like reading. But,
that's good. And I'm going to confess that I usually read nonfiction books. So I am one of those folks. So I actually want to not mean that. Let's see. What was the last book that I read just for funsies? So this is going to sound like research, but I wasn't writing this book back then. I read Circe by Madeline Miller, right? And and to be fair, I listened to it on audio, and the person reading the audio was just so delightful. It was so good. So that was the last thing I read, I think, for fun, and it was before I wrote a book on Circe that's coming out late next year. But I listened to that, read that way before. So I'm a big fan of, like, the gods and their messiness. So there was a lot in that, and just beautifully crafted, and just such a good book. If you have not picked that up yet, read that. It's been out for a while.
I'm working my way through the Roman gods at the moment. I will get to the Greek.
Yes, one pantheon at a time.
So many gods, aren't there?
I feel you. So, yep. Mm-hmm.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been absolutely fascinating. It's such an important subject as well. Really, really important subject. Thank you so much, Irisanya.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you to everyone listening, watching, joining us.
Thank you.
We will see you again next time on Triple P.
You have been listening to the Pagan Portal Podcast, a Moonbooks Publishing production. For more information, please visit our website.